Ego and Archetype, Part 14. We're up to Chapter 5. So, Chapter 4 was the search for meaning. Chapter 5 is Christ as a paradigm of the individuating ego. Wow. As always, we start from a quote. This time it's from Jung himself. I am not addressing myself to the happy possessors of faith, but to those many people for whom the light has gone out. The mystery has faded, and God is dead. For most of them, there is no going back, and one does not know either whether going back is the better way. To gain an understanding of religious matters, probably all that is left us today is the psychological approach. That is why I take these thought forms that have become historically fixed, try to melt them down again and pour them into molds of immediate experience. Part 1. The acceptance of separateness. The image of Christ and the rich network of symbolism which has gathered around him provide many parallels to the individuation process. I have a feeling this could be my favorite chapter. In fact, when the Christian myth is examined carefully in the light of analytical psychology, the conclusion is inescapable that the underlying meaning of Christianity is the quest for individuation. The myth of Jesus Christ is unique in its assertion of the paradoxical double aspect of Christ. He is both God and man. As Jesus, he is a human being living a particular limited historical existence in space and time. As Christ, he's the anointed one, the king, the logos that has existed from the beginning beyond space and time, the eternal deity itself. Understood psychologically, this means that Christ is simultaneously a symbol for both the self and the ideal ego. Jung has developed in some detail the idea of Christ as a symbol of the self. The circumstances of Christ's birth, his performance of miracles, the various images of the kingdom of heaven, his cognomen, Son of Man, which equates him with the original anthropos, or primordial man, the symbols of totality which surround him, such as the 4 evangelists, the 12 disciples, Alpha and Omega, and the symbolism of the cross. All these pertain to the phenomenology of the self. Wow. But although Jung has made interesting suggestions on the subject, he has never really elaborated the idea of Christ as symbol of the ego. In this chapter, I shall attempt a brief exploration of this subject. It should be clear, however, that my remarks are only preliminary suggestions toward a future psychology of the Christian myth. The nature of the historical Jesus has always been a problem for scholars and theologians. The nature of the historical Jesus has always been a problem. In the Gospel accounts, personal fact and archetypal image are so closely intermixed that it is almost impossible to distinguish them. However, although details remain uncertain, a definite historical personality with astonishing psychological insight is revealed in the Gospels. Jesus was probably an illegitimate child. Certainly, he demonstrates some characteristic features of the individual who has had no personal father. When the personal father is missing, and more particularly when he is completely unknown, as may happen with an illegitimate child, there is no layer of personal experience to mediate between the ego and the numinous image of the archetypal father. A kind of hole is left in the psyche through which emerge the powerful archetypal contents of the collective unconscious. Such a condition is a serious danger. It threatens inundation of the ego by the dynamic forces of the unconscious, causing disorientation and loss of relation to external reality. If, however, the ego can survive this danger, the hole in the psyche becomes a window providing insights into the depths of being. Jesus would appear to fit the above description. He experienced a direct relation to the heavenly, archetypal, Father, and described in numerous vivid symbolic images the nature of the kingdom of heaven, the archetypal psyche. It is evident from his teachings that he had a profound awareness of the reality of the psyche. Whereas the Mosaic law recognized only the reality of deeds, Jesus recognized the reality of inner psychic states. For example, you have heard that it was said to the man of old, "You shall not kill, and whoever kills shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment." And again, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." These passages have a major psychological impact. They represent a transition from a kind of crude behavioristic psychology to one which is aware of the reality of the psyche as such without concrete actions. The gospel accounts abound in many other major psychological discoveries. Jesus formulated the conception of psychological projection 2,000 Jesus formulated the conception of psychological projection 2,000 years before depth psychology. Quote, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, with never a thought for the great plank in your own eye?" He recognized the danger of psychic identification with parents and family. Today, analysts still encounter references to the Old Testament commandment to honor one's mother and father as justification for a state of unconscious identity with the parents. Jesus expressed himself clearly on this issue. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes will be those of his own household. A man's foes are those of his own household because it is... end of quote. A man's foes are those of his own household because it is those to whom he is closest with, whom he is most apt to be identified unconsciously. Such identifications must be dissolved because an awareness of radical separateness is a prerequisite for individuation. The divisive aspect of what Jesus represents is made even more explicit in a saying recorded in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. Jesus says, "Men indeed think I have come to bring peace to the world, but they do not know that I have come to bring to the world discord, fire, sword, war. Indeed, if there are 5 people in a house, they will become 3 against 2, and 2 against 3, father against son, and son against father, and they will be lifted up to the state of being solitaries." End of quote. The end of this passage makes clear the purpose of inciting discord. It is to achieve this solitary condition, the state of being an autonomous individual. This can be achieved only by a separation from unconscious identification with others. In the early stages, the separatio is experienced as painful strife and hostility. Parents and family are the most frequent objects of unconscious identification. Jesus singles out the Father for special mention. "And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven." Yeah. Parents have power over their grown children only because the latter continue to project the images of the archetypal parents to their personal parents. To call no man father means to withdraw all projections of the father archetype and discover it within. Jesus demands a commitment to the self which transcends loyalty to any personal relationship. Transcends loyalty to any personal relationship. Quote, "He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and he who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me." Here we have the origin of the idea of the imitation of Christ, the ideal man, ego, whose life is to be followed as a model. The same idea is in Matthew 16:24 to 26. "If anyone wishes to be a follower of mine, he must leave self behind. He must take up his cross and come with me. Whoever cares for his own safety is lost. But if a man let himself be lost for my sake, he will find his true self." What will a man gain by winning the whole world at the cost of his true self? End of the quote. Man, I thought the hymn of the pearl hit me. To convey the proper meaning, the translators are obliged to translate the same word. I think it's got the Hebrew there. By two different terms. Self and true self. If psychological terms be permitted, the phrase could read, if a man will lose his ego for my sake, he will find the self. Psychologically understood, the cross can be seen as Christ's destiny, his unique life pattern to be fulfilled. To take up one's own cross would mean to accept and consciously realize one's own particular pattern of wholeness. The attempt to imitate Christ literally and specifically is a concretistic mistake in the understanding of a symbol. Seen symbolically, Christ's life will be a paradigm to be understood in the context of one's own unique reality, and not as something to be slavishly imitated. Jung has spoken clearly on this subject. Quote, "We Protestants must sooner or later face this question. Are we to understand the imitation of Christ in the sense that we should copy his life and, if I may use the expression, ape his stigmata, or in the deeper sense that we are to live our own proper lives as truly as he lived his, in its individual uniqueness? It is no easy matter to live a life that is modelled on Christ, but it is unspeakably harder to live one's own life as truly as Christ lived his." Part 2. The ethical teaching. The ethical teaching of Jesus has always been a problem. It is admittedly a counsel of perfection. If taken literally and applied consistently to the external world, it is inimical to material existence. Jung has suggested another way to understand it, namely on the subjective or inner level. His approach is given its first clear expression in the Seminar on Visions presented in the autumn of 1930 in Zurich. Jung is discussing a patient and has said that the patient should not look down on her own inferiority, but should accept it. He continues, "Now this is a Christian attitude, for instance. Jesus said that the least among our brethren is himself, and that we should give him refuge and sanctuary." Matthew 25:40. And already in the 1st century after Christ, there were philosophers like Hippocrates who held that the least of one's brethren, the inferior man, is oneself. They therefore directly read the Sermon on the Mount on the subjective level. For instance, as he, Hippocrates, said, "If thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thou hast aught against thyself, leave then thy gift, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thyself, and then come and offer thy gift." It is a grand truth, and it is most probably the real idea behind Christian teaching. End of quote. The subjective method of interpretation, when applied consistently to the teachings of Jesus, yields a host of insights that are remarkably similar to the discoveries of depth psychology. Seen in this light, Jesus' teachings become a kind of manual for promoting the individuation process. By way of example, let us consider the subjective interpretation of the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, 3-10. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In the New English Bible we read, those who know they are poor. The literal meaning of hoi pachoi to pneumati in the Greek text of this passage is beggars for the spirit. Hence the meaning is blessed are those who are aware of their spiritual poverty and are humbly seeking what they need. Understood psychologically, the meaning would be the ego, which is aware of its own emptiness of spirit. Life meaning is in a fortunate position because it is now open to the unconscious and has the possibility of experiencing the archetypal psyche, the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mourning is caused by the loss of an object or person who was carrying an important projected value. In order to withdraw projections and assimilate their content into one's own personality, it is necessary to experience the loss of the projection as a prelude to rediscovering the content or value within. Therefore, mourners are fortunate because they are involved in a growth process. They will be comforted when the lost projected value has been recovered within the psyche. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Subjectively understood, meekness will refer to an attitude of the ego towards the unconscious. Such an attitude is fortunate because it is teachable and open to new considerations which can lead to a rich inheritance. To inherit the earth suggests an awareness of being individually related to or having a personal stake in the whole, the wholeness of life, the total human enterprise. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. In the Dewey version, we read, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice, for they shall have their fill. Right or justice is here represented as something that nourishes. Understood psychologically, it is an objective inner law or guiding principle that brings a sense of fulfillment to the ego, which seeks it in hunger, i.e. an empty ego that does not identify its own opinions and judgments with the objective inner law. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. It is a basic principle of analytical psychology that the unconscious takes the same attitude toward the ego as the ego takes toward the unconscious. If, for example, the ego has a kind and considerate attitude toward the shadow, the latter will be helpful to the ego. If the ego is merciful, it will receive mercy from within. If the ego is merciful, it will receive mercy from within. The contrary corollary is all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Purity or cleanliness or cleanness. Purity or cleanness can signify subjectively a state of the ego which is free from contamination by identification with unconscious contents or motivations. That which is conscious is clean or clear. The ego which is conscious of its own dirt is pure, and the way is open to it to experience the self. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. It is the appropriate role of the ego to mediate between the opposing parties of an intrapsychic conflict. If the ego identifies with one side of the conflict, no resolution leading to wholeness is possible. The dissociation becomes permanent. If the ego serves the reconciling function of peacemaker, it is acting in the interests of totality, the self, and hence as Son of God. Blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for justice's sake, in the Duo version. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The ego needs to endure pain and hurt without succumbing to bitterness and resentment. In order to be related to the objective inner law. Such an ego attitude is rewarded by contact with the archetypal psyche and its healing, life-giving images. The major point of the Beatitudes, as understood psychologically, is praise of the emptied or non-inflated ego. In Jesus' time, violence and unconscious instinctuality were rampant. The ego easily identified in a primitive fashion with the superpersonal energies of the archetypal psyche and evidenced its inflation by symptoms of anger, violence, and lust. According to Jesus' teaching, the ego must be emptied of such inflated identifications before it can perceive the transpersonal psyche as something separate from itself. In this connection of the kenosis, doctrine of the incarnation is relevant. In this connection, the kenosis doctrine of the incarnation is relevant. This doctrine is based chiefly on two Pauline passages. Most important is Philippians 2, 5, 6, 7. Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. The second passage is found in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. According to the kenosis doctrine, the incarnation of Jesus was a voluntary process of emptying, whereby he divested himself of his eternal and infinite divine attributes in order to take human form. This image of incarnation by emptying fits precisely the process of ego development, during which the ego progressively relinquishes its original omnipotent identification with the self in order to achieve a limited but actual existence in the real world of space and time. The dream of a patient in analysis indicates how the kenosis image is still operating in the modern psyche. The dreamer was a gentle, sensitive young man who had difficulty in asserting himself and becoming a definite individual. He had this dream. I dreamed I saw a modern Christ figure. He was traveling in a bus with a group of his disciples. Then I sensed there was danger. He was going to be betrayed. It happened, and the bus rocked. Rocked with violence. He was set upon and subdued. I looked in and saw that they had apparently tied ropes to each of his hands and feet and pulled him tight, spread-eagled in 4 directions. I knew they would kill him that way. Then it appeared, when I looked at him more closely, that he was not tied by the hands, but was grasping with each hand a wooden bar attached to the rope. He was cooperating in his own death. At the end of the dream came an image of a magnetic field of force, which looked like this drawing. It's got the drawing there. It's amazing. You saw the drawing. It's like a cross with some axis lines. The nature of this dream indicates that a crucial nuclear process of transformation is taking place. Such a dream defies adequate rational interpretation, but some amplification is possible. The cross is a field of force. The cross as a field of force has a parallel in a 14th century cross as a field of force. The cross as a field of force has a parallel in a 14th century painting. In this picture, Christ is being crucified in the lap of God the Father, whose garments are represented as lines of force with outward radiations. Thus, the human figure is being transfixed on a 4-fold structure by a transcendent energy field. Wow. Understood psychologically, every time it says psychologically, just prepare yourself. Understood psychologically, this image would express the experience of the ego as it comes into proximity of the superior energy of the self. The dream combines the idea of crucifixion with the image of dismemberment. This same combination is found in a 19th century woodcut. Dismembered heads and limbs are hanging from the cross, suggesting that the image of the crucifixion is being superimposed on a myth of dismemberment such as that of Osiris. Dismemberment can be understood psychologically as a transformative process which divides up an original unconscious content for purpose of conscious assimilation. Or, put another way, it is original unity submitting to dispersal and multiplicity for the sake of realization in spatio-temporal existence. It says that will be discussion of unity and multiplicity in chapter 6. In the dream, the Christ figure is undergoing a voluntary process of dismemberment or emptying. In terms of the dreamer's psychology, this would suggest the breaking up of an ideal or otherworldly attitude in order to make a realistic life adaptation. In archetypal terms, the dream depicts the willing sacrifice of the self as an eternal image in order that it can become manifest in consciousness as energy. So I just had I'm just going a bit schizoid because he's got his book on the archetype of sacrifice and the archetype of the apocalypse. It's the tendency, the unconscious sacrificing, manifesting through sacrificing through the ego, if that makes sense. That was the magnetic field of force. Unity is split into two pairs of polar opposites, which create tension and conflict, but at the same time generate energy for real life accomplishment. Numerous other aspects of Jesus' teaching lend themselves to psychological interpretation. I shall review briefly a few of them. We'll save that for the next part.